right then. And now I need to share my screen. Where is share screen? There it is. All righty. Perfect. Can you see my screen? Perfect. Okay, well, I'm going to start. Welcome. I'm Amy Karalik, and tonight this presentation is going to be on brain foods. And I'm psyched to talk to you about this today because I love food and I like to feed people, and I'm a major food tourist and forager. So in this presentation, I'm going to give you a little bit about local food tourism babble from our local area so that you can all source your local brain foods as well as at the grocery store. I'm presenting to you live from Abbotsford, BC, on unceded traditional territory of the Mathgui First Nation of the Stolo people. So my presentation will be based on the foods from this area, which is very specific because, some of these foods you might not be able to find if you're foraging in different areas. So this is highly specific to this area. Please note that this presentation will be recorded and put online immediately afterwards. So if you're uncomfortable with your image or your name showing from the Zoom meeting, now's the time to hide that information. And at the end of this presentation, I will leave about 10 minutes for a question and answer period if you would like. This free version of Zoom kicks us off anywhere between 30 to 40 minutes. So if Zoom kicks us out at the end and you still have questions after this book time period, you can feel free to message me after the session, or you can put your comments in the post that I'm going to be putting on our class forum. All right, with that being said, I'm going to hop right in. So here's an overview of what we're going to be covering tonight. What are brain foods? What am I supposed to eat? What am I not supposed to eat? What's so special about brain food? And then a recap. So for starters, what the heck are brain foods? I don't know about you, but after all the zombie movies and games that I've seen, my first thought when I saw the term brain food was zombies, because zombies' favorite food is brains. What's hilarious is when I actually typed in brain food into my best friend Google, it also spouted off tons of information about actually eating brains. So I have perverted Google, but yeah, I found that really funny. I'm like, well, I'm not the only person that thinks brain foods and zombies. So what I've included here is some information from Wikipedia, because they actually go into detail on Wikipedia about what cultures serve what sorts of brain as a delicacy, including the names of the dishes if you're really interested in learning about using brains as food. A little personal warning, though, about eating brain matter, aka offal. I lived in Europe while the whole mad cow disease stuff was going on, and anyone who lived in the area for longer than 6 weeks was banned from donating blood and organs. This impacted me and my family until, for most of my life actually, until literally this past December, because of the inability for screening capabilities for the human form of mad cow disease called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. So caution, eating the wrong kind of brains or being in the vicinity of people eating the wrong kind of brains can have a lasting impact on your own personal freedoms. So eat brains with caution. I suspect when Doug gave us these writing prompts, we weren't supposed to be talking about eating brains or zombies. So I'm going to get to the real meat of this topic. Although food has classically been perceived as a means to provide energy and building material to the body, its ability to prevent and protect against diseases is also starting to be recognized. Research is starting to provide exciting evidence about the influence of diet on systems and mechanisms that maintain your mental function. So in layperson's terms, the foods that are helpful for your brain health are called brain foods, to make it easy for everybody to understand. Brain foods is a term that's often used to describe foods that can boost brain power and improve memory, focus, and concentration. These are foods that are rich in vitamins, antioxidants, and other nutrients that our brains need to function their best. So let's talk about some of the stuff that you're supposed to eat according to research. There's some variance between sources about what exactly to eat, but there are some overlaps on every study that I read that everybody agreed upon. So what I ended up using for this particular presentation was Harvard Medical School's information. Their research shows that the best brain foods are the same ones that protect your heart and the rest of your blood organs, including the following. So there's green veggies, fatty fish, berries, tea and coffee, and then walnuts, which is kind of funny because it's so specific. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive into each one of these a little bit more one by one. So leafy greens, what the heck are leafy greens? So they're like the green veggies, those leafy greens. So things like kale, spinach, collards, and broccoli, as shown here in this picture here. They are full of brain healthy nutrients like vitamin K, something called lutein, which I have no idea what it is, folate, and beta carotene, which I only thought was in carrots. Research suggests that these plant-based foods may help slow cognitive decline. So that's awesome. As I age, I like to know about that sort of stuff. Some additional leafy greens can include cabbages, things like bok choy, mustard, and other dark greens, lettuce, and of course, other salad greens. Any leafy greens, it seems, anything with leaves and that anything is green. So good rule of thumb there. I also talked about spinach and broccoli being part of this green veggies and this leafy green section. They're also high in iron, so they can also do double duty for some of our daily intake needs for vitamins and stuff like that. Leafy greens can also be found locally, not just in the grocery store. So according to Pojar and MacKinnon, indigenous groups here in North America in this particular area on the western coast, they harvested several types of leafy greens that you might even recognize in your own backyard. You might identify these all as weeds, these ones that are showing up in the picture here, because they don't fit in with the stereotypical front lawn and are all considered invasive species. But with the right harvesting and preparation techniques, all of these things shown on the screen here are local superfoods. So locally grown superfoods of the green leafy variety are dandelion and chickweed, stinging nettle, which is terrifying but interesting, and watercress. You can also find many other edible plant species on a website called Plants for a Future. And so I'll have the references after my presentation when I post it online for that link and all of these references so that you can find your own leafy greens in your neighborhood. Next up, fatty fish. So fatty fish are abundant sources of omega-3 fatty acids, which have been linked to lower blood levels of something called beta amyloid. And it has my name in it. I hate it every time they have these things that say AMY, and then it's something horrible. Beta amyloid is apparently the protein that forms damaging clumps in the brains of people with Alzheimer's disease. So yeah, apparently this amyloid, beta amyloid, is a bad thing. So you don't want that. So you want unsaturated fats like these omega-3 fatty acids so that it's easier for your body to digest it quickly. So an easy rule of thumb about what kinds of fish are considered fatty fish are the ones that you can find in cold water. So basically all Canadian fish is a fatty fish, which is fantastic. Common types of fatty fish are salmon, which is really local here, cod, tuna, pollock, mackerel, herring, sardines, and even shrimp. So I thought that was kind of interesting too, because I didn't think shrimp lived nearby, and I love shrimp. So yay. So there's going to be a short activity on this screen here on what's showing up on the slide. So please take a good look at these as I'm listing them out. Right to left, top to bottom. Again, the common types of fatty fish are salmon, cod, tuna, pollock, mackerel, herring, sardines, and shrimp. Trout is also a fatty fish, which wasn't pictured on that previous slide. And we actually have our own rainbow trout species here in the Fraser Valley, grown in our own trout hatcheries here in BC and Stockton lakes across the province. So here's a slide actually from the Freshwater Fisheries Society of BC's website. And they have a whole information section about our specific trout species here, the Fraser Valley rainbow trout. So it's been recommended to eat fish 2 to 3 times a week, but there are some warnings about consuming fatty fish. They're high in calories, so weight gain is definitely a possibility if you go whole hog eating fatty fish. Another warning about consuming fatty fish is to be aware of the environment that they come from because they are susceptible to toxins in the food chain as well as in their local environment. So don't be going fishing for your fatty fish in a garbage dump. The last warning about eating fatty fish is the preparation of your fatty fish. It's very important because a piece of deep fried piece of cod is probably going to be a lot less healthy for you and extra fatty. Not the good fatty either. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So here's the activity. And I just wanted, before we started to do the activity, look at the varieties of color in each type of fish on this slide. I'm not terribly knowledgeable about fish, so looking up the different types of fatty fish for this presentation was incredibly interesting for me. So here's a quick participation moment. How many of these types of fatty fish can you name? Feel free to turn on your mic and call out any answers of any of these fatty fish types. And I did list off a couple of those names a few minutes ago. So go right ahead.
The top left is salmon. It looks like cod. Tuna. I love tuna.
Yes.
I'm not sure what the top right is. Some sort of I don't know, haddock or something like that. Mackerel, herring, sardines, and shrimps or prawns. I love fish.
You're amazing. You got all of them. The only one that you were missing was pollock.
There we go.
There you go. And it's not one that we normally have on this coast anyway. So wow, you rocked it. Nicely done. Okay, well, you can shut off your microphone now if you'd like. And we'll move on to the next part. But well done. Nice work. So the next thing in the brain foods group are berries. So flavonoids are the natural plant pigments that give berries their brilliant hues, and they also improve memory, as research shows. A study done by researchers at Harvard's Brigham and Women's Hospital actually found that women who consumed 2 or more servings of strawberries and blueberries each week delayed their memory decline by up to 2.5 years. So eat more berries. That's good. We are so fortunate to live in the Fraser Valley, which grows the majority of the berries in Canada. We are pretty much the berry capital here in Abbotsford, and we are just coming into the prime berry season. So yeah, it's a good time to get those extra berries with all those flavonoids. The types of berries that I have listed on the slide here as well are all locally available to this area. If you're looking for these brain foods outside of your usual supermarket experience, we've got tons of farmers markets and roadside stands that are just starting to appear. So here's a little map showing just a little snapshot there of the Abbotsford area alone. And several of these berry stands actually take credit cards instead of just cash, which is fantastic because it makes it incredibly easy to buy way too much cheap and expensive fruit, maybe. I don't know. Most of the time, the places I go are cheap and I get way too much, and we eat fruit for pretty much a month solid. As a tourist in our neighborhood here, the first weekend in July, the Abbotsford Downtown Business Association hosts an annual Berry Fest if you're a bit of a festival goer. And so they have all sorts of different kinds of berries. They have carnival rides and all sorts of marketplace stuff, but it's basically just a berry festival. There's lots of strawberries and blueberries present at that festival. So if you're a festival goer, there's an opportunity for you as well. The cranberries that I showed on the previous slide, they also have a festival and they're available later in the season. So there is an annual cranberry festival that takes place in Fort Langley the Saturday just before Thanksgiving that allows people to get fresh cranberries locally grown to go with their turkey, which I think is fantastic advertising for, the reason why most people eat cranberries. So those bright flavonoid pigments that are so good for your brain are also great at staining clothing, as you might have noticed if you've ever been going berry picking and then ending up with different colored fingers and clothing. I did a Plants and People course through TRU a couple of years ago, and I actually did my capstone project on the native dye plants in the Fraser Valley. So the blues that we have from blueberries and blackberries are incredibly rare in the plant world in terms of dye stuff. Only these these two other plants here, Dyer's Woad, which is from Scotland, you know, Braveheart, they had those blue stripes on everybody's faces. To make that blue pigment was from Dyer's Woad. It doesn't look like it. It's got yellow flowers, but it actually makes like a bluey purple. And then of course the purpley bluey that everybody is mostly familiar with is indigo. And that's from Southeast Asia and Asian countries. And so it's actually not grown locally here. And to extract the color out of indigo is actually quite a very toxic process. And so prior to synthetic dyes being created, those were the only sources of blues and purple in the entire world. So again, we're incredibly fortunate to have this abundant brain food and rare dye stuff on our doorstep. I've referenced a few times Pojar and MacKinnon's book in this presentation. And as part of the research that I did for this native dye plants project, I connected to one of their contributors with their book. Her name is Nancy Turner. She's actually an ethnobotanist from UVic who's worked with First Nation elders and cultural specialists in Northwestern North America for like 50 years. And so she works with Indigenous communities and helps document and retain and promote their traditional knowledge of plants and habitats, including the foods and materials and stuff like that. She was incredibly approachable and willing to share all of her learnings with me. And now I'm a huge fan of her research, and I'm loving getting to know my natural local area. And so her link is also going to be in my references when I post this video. If you want to meet her or you have any questions about our local plants and foods, and maybe if you would like to connect with some local Indigenous people in your area, she's an excellent resource and is incredibly approachable in all of her knowledge. She's incredible. So hopping back into the berries and their flavonoids friends, some other items that contain flavonoids are something called ginkgo. I have no idea what that is. I believe it's a South Asian plant, so it's probably why I'm not familiar with it. Citrus fruits, red wine, and dark chocolate also contain flavonoids. So we grow lots of wine grapes here in the Fraser Valley and in the Okanagan. So you can definitely find some of these kinds of flavonoids locally. The next brain food that was listed by Harvard Medical School are hot drinks, tea, and coffee. So in a study that I came across that was published in the Journal of Nutrition, participants with higher caffeine consumption scored better on tests of mental function. Caffeine might also help solidify new memories, according to other research. So investigators at Johns Hopkins University asked participants to study a series of images and then take either a placebo or a 200 milligram caffeine tablet. And more members of the caffeine group were actually able to correctly identify the images on the following day. So that's how they were testing to see how your memory is affected by caffeine. So non-caffeinated drinks like tisanes or other hot drinks weren't explicitly listed in the Harvard medical piece. So really, I was under the assumption that brain food, this particular brain food, would be about caffeine. So I did a little bit of research about caffeine as well. Caffeine is the most widely used stimulant, and it's consumed daily by 80% of the world's population and 90% of the North American population, according to Heckman and al. And a research study by Sherman and al. Drew the conclusion that caffeine results in explicit memory enhancement for young adults during their non-optimal time of the day, which is early morning, which is, you know, normally when people have their coffee, and especially when they start their coffee drinking journey, most people start it fairly early in their life, and this is probably why. This same study also noted that caffeine intake in the non-optimal time for older adults, which is mid-afternoon, has a positive result in explicit memory enhancement for older adults, which is kind of funny because most people kind of get sluggish after lunch. There's like that 2-3 o'clock time where people are like, oh, I need a coffee. This is actually backed by science that it will help with memory, and that's when adults get sluggish. So I didn't do any research on when it decides young people to older adults, but I'm just going to leave that one alone right now. They did say that if you ingest caffeine 30 minutes prior to needing your memory, has the most positive effects on your memory. So good to know. So chug back a coffee and drive to work, and then you should be ready to rock. According to another study that I found by a person whose last name is Mosconi, the caffeine has dilating or widening of blood vessels effects. And so it increases blood flow to all your organ systems, including your brain. So for those of us that have allergies to caffeine, this is all good to know. I'm allergic to caffeine, so I don't indulge in any of this stuff. So, but it was good to know because now I can now understand my coworkers' need for that late afternoon caffeine jolt. And for the rest of us that have allergies, we're going to have to find our brain foods elsewhere. Thankfully, there's lots of them. Okay, but also caffeine aside, cocoa and green tea also contain what were in those berries, the flavonoids that we had talked about earlier. So coffee and tea actually do a double duty as a brain food. It's like a double whammy there. We don't grow tea or coffee here in the Fraser Valley, so there isn't any foraging of these particular items here. However, according to Pojar and MacKinnon, our indigenous groups here use chicory and dandelion roots for making hot drinks similar to coffee. But like most tisanes or herbal teas, they don't contain caffeine. We already did discuss dandelion under leafy greens. So again, that's one of those plants that does double duty, which is super neat. And dandelions in particular have been found to be high in a new type of flavonoid compound, according to a study done by Wang and al. So that was really interesting to me. So not only is it a leafy green, not only does it have the effects like coffee, like waking people up, but it's also got those flavonoids that we talked about berries. And it's literally in my front yard right now with those giant puff balls. So yeah, maybe I'm going to keep them around for a little bit longer. So I wasn't lying when I said we had local superfoods growing right in our front yards. So the last of the brain foods that was suggested by Harvard Medical was walnuts. Literally, that's it, just straight walnuts. And I found that so bizarre because everything else had kind of a grouping, but this one literally is just talking about walnuts, not nuts, but walnuts. So a study from UCLA linked higher walnut consumption to improved cognitive test scores. Walnuts are also high in a type of omega-3 fatty acid called alpha linolenic acid, or ALA. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. ALAs aren't as easy to digest as the fatty acids found in fish, so it takes a little bit of extra energy to convert it, but because of those fatty acids, they're an ideal brain food. Another thing is that walnuts, they look like little brains, so this is probably nature's clue that these are supposed to be good for your brain, because yeah, when you look at this picture, you can kind of tell it's a little brainy. So for those that have nut allergies, just like I pointed out for the people that have caffeine allergies, if you have a nut allergy, you'll probably have to skip having this brain food on your menu. So for our foraging fans, we actually have a black walnut species called Juglans nigra that is in the area. They're native to North America and especially southern BC. You can identify them by the fact that they are excellent shade trees. They grow about 50 to 100 feet tall and pretty much kill every single plant underneath their drip line because they actually have a natural herbicide in their roots called juglone or juglone. I think it's juglone, but I've never actually checked the pronunciation. The walnuts themselves, they look like the picture on the left. So they don't really look like the ones that you see in the grocery store for sale because those are the English walnut breed. But inside the nutshell, they all look the same. They look like the little brains. And so if you're buying your walnuts that are already deshelled and they look like the little brains, they could be from the English walnut or the black walnut. You really can't tell the difference. The young walnuts in the tree, and I've seen these all over the place. And until I actually did the research, about the plants in my area, I actually thought these were limes. And so if you see a plant that kind of looks like it has limes, we don't grow limes here locally, but they're green and they're about this big, like maybe a little bit more than bigger than a golf ball. And they're growing in trees and there's these little green balls. That might be a walnut tree. So it's a good thing to look for when you're going for a neighborhood walk. A caution about harvesting black walnuts is to wear gloves because they are also an excellent dye plant and they will dye your hands black for literally weeks. Ask me how I know. And it is a great source of black dye. And again, that's a really tricky one to get, is a black dye. There's only a few sources, again, available in the area. And so, yeah, again, we're incredibly fortunate to have these plants here in, southern BC, here in the Fraser Valley. So I told you all the fun stuff about all the good things you're supposed to eat. So on the flip side of those brain foods that I just shared with you, here are some foods that we're suggested to stay away from. They don't have a catchy name to go by. So I just called them anti-brain foods. So while certain foods can boost your brain function, these ones specifically are supposed to hinder your concentration and make you feel sluggish. These anti-brain foods, I don't know what they're called, but that's what we're going by today. They include sugary snacks and drinks, fast food, and processed foods. So these foods can cause like a rapid spike and then a drop in blood sugar, leading to fatigue. And then, of course, when you're tired, you have difficulty concentrating. So glucose, a form of sugar, is the primary source of energy for every cell in the body. We know this from probably high school science. Because the brain is so rich in nerve cells or neurons, it's the most energy demanding organ, and it uses 1/2 of all the sugar energy in the body, which is pretty darn impressive. Although the brain needs glucose, too much of this energy source can be a bad thing. So, in a 2009 study conducted by a team of scientists at the University of Montreal and Boston College, they linked excess glucose consumption to memory and cognitive deficiencies. So, the effects of glucose and other forms of sugar on the brain, they actually found that it was most profound in people with diabetes, which is a group of diseases that high blood glucose levels remain high for a long period of time. So, I thought that was very interesting, and it made me kind of want to stop eating those 5-cent sour candies that are so delicious, and I can't stop eating them once I have a bag of them. Refined carbs are carbs that are was the next recommended bad food. They are refined through a manufacturing process that removes most of their healthy nutrients and compounds. So carbs, again, they're made up of sugars, and normally they contain fiber and vitamins and minerals and things like that. But the manufacturing or refining process removes these. So whole grains like wheat, they actually have 3 parts. So they've got the bran. So you've probably seen like oat bran or just bran in general. And then there's something called an endosperm. And that's the stuff that makes it not shelf stable if you have your wheat. And so people want to remove that out so that your flour can last longer. And then there's the germ. So the bran and the germ contain plenty of vitamins. Sorry, I got that the other way around. The germ, not the endosperm. The germ is the one that it makes the shelf life unstable. So yeah, they contain lots of vitamins and minerals, but the endosperm is easily digestible. And so things like bread and pasta, you got to watch it because it's going to give you a, kind of a spike in your blood sugar levels, the same as sugar. Another thing that we're not supposed to eat is processed foods. And this one's kind of tricky because processed foods are anything that's been processed, because everything we eat has been processed, you might be thinking. So because the definition of processed food is so big, basically all food and because basically all food is processed, there actually is a classification system known as NOVA, which classifies foods into the 4 levels of processing. Oh boy, that's in the way. Sorry about that. So it talks about the different classifications. So when we talk about processed foods, we really want to limit the ultra processed foods the most. So with this info in mind, processed food is on a spectrum. So when you're thinking about what's healthy to eat for your brain, you want to keep to the more unprocessed end of the spectrum the most. So the further along you move across that processing spectrum, the more ingredients are added and the good stuff is taken out. And there's more processes to create that end product for that ultra processed food. So the last anti-brain food energy is fried foods. So they tend to be high in calories and trans fats. And trans fats, unlike the fatty acids, they actually cause damage to blood vessels, and inflammation they cause as well, which affects the blood supply to your brain. So things like fish, French fries, chicken strips, if they're deep fried, because you can deep fry pretty much everything. Those things are something to stay away from. So I did kind of talk about it in the fatty fish, and we like to deep fry our fish. So that is something, maybe if you can have a not deep fried fish, that one's going to be better for you overall, according to studies. So you might be asking, what's so special about brain foods? You've probably noticed all the comments about fatty acids. And so fatty acids is something that is the best studied thing that interacts between food and brain evolution. So they have something called DHA. I'm not going to try to pronounce it because it's a long word like that. But it's the most abundant omega-3 fatty acid, and it's really easy for your body to absorb it. And the body doesn't actually create DHA, so we have to be dependent on our diet to provide these omega-3s to it. So that we can, be better in our brain. So in addition to the foods that we had already mentioned earlier, some things that talk about containing omega-3 fatty acids are flax seeds, krill, chia, kiwi fruit, and also butternuts. So that's some other good foods for you. There was a study done by Gomez Pinilla where he talked about major depression versus how much people eat fish. And so he pointed out over the last 100 years, we've been eating a lot more of the saturated fatty acids, and we haven't been eating as much as the healthy omega-3 fatty acids. And there's still some areas like in Japan and Korea and Taiwan where they're known to eat a lot more fish. You can actually see the difference of having less depression, and they're linking that specifically to fish consumption, but not the deep fry kind, the more healthier chunks of it. And I found this incredibly interesting because I know a lot of people that are struggling with depression. And while I know that we have vitamin D that has positive effects against like seasonal disorder and other kinds of depressions, I never thought about other missing vitamins that could be added to people's struggles. So speaking of vitamins, there's a bunch of vitamins that are good for your brain too. And so these vitamins are found earlier in those brain foods that we talked about earlier. So there's vitamins such as B6 and B12, and they've got positive effects on memory performance, especially in women of various ages. Of course, that's, impactful for me. And so you can find B6 and all of those things that are shown in the picture here. And B12 is found a lot in those fish and meats. So that's something to keep an eye out for. And there is a nice chunk of salmon in both of those categories. Vitamin B is a water-soluble vitamin, and so it can't be stored. So any water-soluble vitamin that is not used by the body, it just leaves through your urine. So yeah, you just want to make sure that you're continuously having those vitamin Bs because they don't stay around in your body very long. Vitamin D is another one that's important for conserving cognition, especially in the elderly. And while your skin produces vitamin D, when it's exposed to the sun's ultraviolet rays, you can cause yourself to have skin cancer. So that's not the most recommended version of getting your vitamin D. And a lot of people actually have insufficient levels of vitamin D, especially in North America, because we have limited sunlight in the winter or we're inside most of the time. Also, people with darker skin tones also have lower levels of vitamin D because while the sun their skin's melanin acts as a shield against the damaging effects of the sun, it also shields them from using the sun's rays to produce vitamin D. So it's definitely something that we want to ingest with our food. And vitamin D is fat soluble, and it helps your body to absorb calcium and phosphorus. And the best way to get it is literally a supplement because it's hard to eat enough of vitamin D through our food. Now, looking at this slide here, again, we've got salmon there, and we've also got some shrimp there as well. So that's definitely a recurring theme here, is salmon is a good thing. We have vitamin C as well. It's an antioxidant that delays cognitive delay in the elderly, and it helps make hormones and chemical messengers that are used to prevent issues with your brain and nerves. And it also prevents scurvy, and it can be found in citrus fruits, but they need to be eaten raw for the full benefit. This one is also a water-soluble vitamin, so it cannot be stored. Too much of a vitamin C, though, can be a bad thing because you can actually get kidney stones, you can get diarrhea, and you can also increase your risk factors for gout and issues with your iron levels with your blood. So you kind of have to have a happy medium, especially when it comes to vitamin C. And again, we've got some creatures here on this slide. We've got leafy greens and we've got some berries on this slide as well. So I'm not a person to go hardcore into the science about why everything works. So here's a fancy picture with arrows. If you know your science stuff, I'm sure this will excite you. And if you're interested in knowing more about vitamins and omega-3 and all sorts of scientific stuff, in my references, there's going to be a fantastic, huge study by Gomez Pinilla, and it's all about brain foods, the effects of nutrient on brain function, and they go into huge detail. So something that was really useful from that particular study was this massive chart listing out nutrients and how they affect your cognitive function. It lists out the nutrients, the effects, the emotion, as well as food source and nutrients. It's an absolute gold mine. And so I was using this source from Gomez Pinilla, against other sources of information about brain foods. It was massive. So if you're looking for more information, definitely check it out. It's really comprehensive. So here's a recap of what we covered tonight. What are brain foods? What am I supposed to eat? What am I not supposed to eat? And what's so special about brain food? And then, of course, there's our recap. So to lock the information in from this presentation, I'm going to show you a quick snapshot of the slides that we saw earlier. And if you'd like, you can turn on your mic and tell me what's so special about them. Are you ready? All right, here we go. What am I?
Leafy greens.
And what's special about it?
I can't remember if it's flavonoids or not or was that berries only?
Well, some of them have flavonoids. You are right, but they've got a lot of vitamins and minerals.
Right. Yep.
So what am I?
Fatty acids for the brain.
Absolutely, fatty fish, and they have fatty acids. So that's what's special about them.
Mm-hmm.
So we got, what am I?
Berries.
And you know the answer to this one. What's my special nutrients?
Flavonoids.
Nice. What am I?
Coffee and tea, they have antioxidants.
Yeah, they've got antioxidants. They've got caffeine and flavonoids as well. So those are also powerful brain foods. And last but not least, what am I?
Walnuts.
And what's their special ingredient?
I forget that one, but I know they look like the brain, so they're good for the brain.
That's awesome. Yeah. So they've got omega-3 fatty, well, they've got a fatty acid as well. And so yes, it's a good one for your brain as well. And you're right, it looks like a brain.